Critical theory. Today we're going to delve into the fascinating origins of critical theory. This was a pivotal intellectual movement birthed by the Frankfurt School in the early 20th century. This movement was not just a single discipline. It was a vibrant confluence of thoughts, ideas, drawing from history, society, philosophy, political economy, cultural anthropology, all of it. And they did this to critically analyze society and culture. The Frankfurt School emerged as a beacon of interdisciplinary research aiming to understand the transformations of society and the various forces that shape human existence. Unlike traditional theory, which sought to explain the world, critical theory had a more ambitious goal: to change it, to critique it. There are some very interesting characters at the Frankfurt School. We have Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Herbert Marcuse, Walter Benjamin, Jürgen Habermas, and Klaus Offt. Each of them brought a unique perspective to the collective endeavor. Horkheimer became the director in 1930, and he introduced the term critical theory and emphasized its distinction from traditional theory. He believed that for theory to be critical, it must strive to liberate human beings from the circumstances that enslave them. I'm going to use Max Horkheimer's own words to talk about his vision of critical theory. The video I'm about to show you is him. I am going to be reading because the German language is very, very long, and this will cut some time down for us. This sociology went beyond the critical theory of society, conceived by Marx in order to reflect reality more adequately. One point is very important. Marx had the ideal of a society of free human beings. He believed that this capitalist society would necessarily have to be overcome by the solidarities spelled by the increasing immiseration. And immiseration is the act of making someone miserable, especially through impoverishment. And he speaks to this of the working class. Says the idea is wrong. The society in which we live does not immiserate the workers, but helps them to build a better life. Marx did not see that freedom and justice are dialectical concepts. The more freedom, the less justice, and the more justice, the less freedom. The critical theory, which I conceived later, is based on the idea that one cannot determine what a good and free society look like from within the society which we now live in. What he is talking about here is everything is always changing, and today's good might be tomorrow's bad. It's all subjective, and if it's coming from one person, it cannot be real. But the work we do can bring up the negative aspects of the society, which we want to change. And if you think about this, the Frankfurt School came around 1923, right? So we've got Hitler's a coming. And you can see these indoctrinations and people taking sides. And I really believe like this is what it came out of, this sort of critique of society and the conformity that we saw through Hitler's indoctrination of so many different people. Think about what Marcuse says today about the capacity for critical thought and choosing conformity. It's really easy. Conforming is simple. We can all do that. We do that in sororities. We do that with sports teams and clubs. We do that with friends. We do that with style. We do that with new social media platforms. And so what's really important and what they're asking us to do is take a step back and think like, okay, is this going to be good for us? And to also look at the very deep power structures that exist. If you think about the university, that is a power structure. When you are in a classroom, the way a classroom is situated is a power structure, not to mention the power imbued in your professors or advisors. And to critique society or anything in this world, it can be difficult because inevitably you'll find out that it's painful. And the reason I say that is because once you start looking beneath all of the power structures and dynamics that we have, it can be jarring and it can make you a bit pessimistic. And a lot of these guys were pessimistic. But they also sought to liberate humans by encouraging critical thinking. And yes, that comes with a lot of different things. It has to do with gender and structures It has to do with prison systems, politics. It has to do with the lines painted on the road. It has to do with everything. So once you start getting down this path, you are going to be more enlightened, but you are going to be a little bit more terrible. And the reason you're going to be a little bit more terrible is because you will start to ruin Christmas dinners. And I am a very good example of that. Now, I have the ways in which I think critically, and other people might have different ways, but mine is very much around race and gender and inequity. So, yes, I have ruined many Christmases. But if you can change one person's mind on a power structure and how to liberate themselves from it, I think it'll make you less terrible and you'll probably feel pretty good. But if you get into this, just be warned, you will ruin dinners. Let's get on to Walter Benjamin. He brought a very cool perspective. He blended cultural analysis with literary criticism. We're going to watch a short video on authenticity and the aura. And then once that is done, I'm going to give you an example of the aura in a way that is easily understood.
In what would become his most influential essay, Benjamin argued that mechanical reproduction not only changed how art was developed or distributed, but changed the very definition of what art was. The essay starts by exploring what's been lost as a result of reproduction, primarily an artistic object's authenticity. He writes that even the most perfect reproduction of a work of art is lacking in one element: its presence in time and space, its unique existence at the place where it happens to be. The ability for artworks to be copied, to be everywhere, of course produces new possibilities, but represses something too. Its aura. This shattering of tradition, this renewal of mankind are intimately connected with the contemporary mass movements, he wrote. But what actually is aura? Benjamin argues it arises out of an object or phenomena's uniqueness, and consequently of being close to that uniqueness. The aura of a sunset or a mountain range and the awe that it inspires. This uniqueness of a work of art also arises from its place in a tradition. Historically, artistic objects were at the centre of ritual, objects of magic, cult, or sacred status. This later developed into appreciating art's beauty and the idea of art for art's sake. What was important with all three was that art's value lay in either the object itself or in the cultishness that gave it its value. The cult of beauty, the cult of art for art's sake, the artist or the object, the leader, the god, the prophet. As art becomes designed with reproducibility more and more in mind, it becomes less dependent on ritual and more dependent on something else: politics. Cultish art existed for its own sake. Paintings pointed inwards. They venerated religious figures or family members. Cults are about their one-of-a-kindishness, the singularness of the figure at the centre. Politics, though, is different. It points to the future, to deliberation, to persuasion. Reproducible art is made with its potential for exhibition in mind, its potential to be seen by the masses and appeal to them in some way. Cinema, photography, radio, they all lose their uniqueness and their aura. The ritualistic aspect dissolves, but Benjamin's also interested in what we get in its place. In particular, we start to focus on the way things are framed, on montage, on cuts, on the text on the plaque, on the article next to the photo, on the location, on the political significance of art. The result of reproducibility is most aptly seen in film and how it can be cut, rearranged and manipulated. For Benjamin, this has revolutionary consequences. Art becomes scientific. But film is also a communal experience, both in the cinema and in the way it brings single subject matters to the masses. Slips of tongue go less unnoticed. Objects can be analysed more precisely. Audiences can react together across the world. Our taverns and our metropolitan streets, our offices and furnished rooms, our railroad stations and our factories appeared to have us locked up hopelessly. Then came the film and burst this prison world asunder by the dynamite of the tenth of a second, so that now, in the midst of its far-flung ruins and debris, we calmly and adventurously go travelling. With the close-up, space expands with slow motion, movement is extended. The moving along of the film, scene after scene, cut after cut, leads you somewhere in a way paintings don't.
So let me explain this in a way that is perfectly clear. Imagine if every piece of art had its own unique bubble of coolness that you could only truly vibe with if you were hanging out in the same room, breathing the same ancient, dusty air. This piece of art is by Kent Monkman. He's a Canadian and he's one of my favorite artists. And I have gone to several of his exhibits. And the most recent one I went to was back in June. And when I was there, the emotion that it elicited from me, the way that I felt, the energy flowing from different people as well that were there. And at one point, some of his artwork is very graphic and beautiful, but it really evokes a deep sense of emotion. And I took a picture of a couple of his artworks and I put them on social media. And when I went back and looked at it, I was like, why would I do this? This is not going to translate. The emotion is never going to translate unless you see it in situ. That's what Walter Benjamin's aura is all about. It's like each artwork has a special aura, that bubble of coolness, a one-of-a-kind glow that's a mix of its history and journey through time and its personal space. It's also about the tradition where it was first produced. And when you try and copy or take a selfie with it, it's like trying to capture a ghost with a net. Something essential just slips through. It's the difference between seeing a live concert and watching the same thing on your phone. One is alive with energy of the moment and other, well, you'll get it. You just don't have the same vibe. Think about Banksy, okay? So Banksy does these artworks that are on places, right? They're on walls and, buildings, all that kind of stuff. And if you go to Amsterdam and you go to the Banksy Museum, they've removed large swaths of concrete to put in a museum. And it removes it from that place and time. So it's not in situ, which means it's not in its original context, and therefore it loses its energy. And then if you go to the gift shop and you buy a print of Banksy or any t-shirt that you can find on the internet, that's not the essence of what the artist intended, correct? Because they're placed in a space and time for particular reasons and moments in history. By intertwining history, sociology, philosophy, and all the other disciplines, these thinkers embarked on a mission to uncover the mechanisms through which society operates and to challenge those who perpetuate inequality and oppression. The Frankfurt School contribution to critical theory is monumental, providing with us all the tools to question and analyze the complex web of societal and cultural relations. Their work encourages us to critically examine the world around us, inspire change, and foster a more reflective and equitable society. So if we're thinking about critical theory, its aim is to understand the underlying social conditions that create inequality and to transform society towards greater equality and justice. In the contemporary world, critical theory is applied across various fields and issues, influencing both academic research and practical actions in society. I'm going to talk to you about a couple ways in which they are applied in reality. First, we have education. No-brainer. Critical pedagogy, inspired by our pal, Paulo Freire, and others, applies critical theory to education, challenging the traditional power dynamics between teachers and students and advocating for a more inclusive, dialogic, and problem-posing educational model. I want you to think for a second about how you experienced elementary school, high school, how you experience your classes now. What does it look like? We're confined to desks in a row where there is a teacher at the front with a big blackboard or a big PowerPoint presentation, and it's centered right on that professor. Now, who do you think that serves? Does it serve the students at all? Sure, we sit there, we listen, right? But we know so much more about education and the interaction and conversation and movement and creativity that can go into these things. So when you're in elementary school and you're asked to draw a picture, you're in your row of desks. And I'm sure you would get in trouble if you didn't sit in your right desk. But that is not really much about anything unless it's about discipline. But there are so many interesting ways to engage with students. And I'll give you a great example. When I was in the 4th grade, we had a professor named Mr. Stamps. And Mr. Stamps wore a big fishing vest every day. And all the pockets were loaded up with very cool stickers. And every year he built this giant pressed wood castle with pillows. And we could all go read in there. Nothing was normal about that class. It was fun. We would have activities, go run outside. And I guarantee you, I learned more in the 4th grade than I did from the 5th to the 12th. Okay, I'll digress. Let's get into media studies. Critical media studies use critical theory to analyze how media and culture reflect and reinforce power dynamics and social inequalities. It examines issues such as media ownership, think Sinclair, representation, and the ideological messages conveyed through the media content, advocating for media literacy and alternative media practices that challenge mainstream narratives. I'm going to get to something very cool shortly. For now, we have to move on to legal studies. Critical legal studies apply critical theory to the law, examining how legal systems perpetuate power imbalances and social injustices. The questions the neutrality of law and seeks to uncover the ways in which law and legal practice maintain social hierarchies, advocating for legal reforms that promote social justice. Gender studies, feminist theory, and queer theory apply to critical theory to issues of gender and sexuality. They examine the societal constructs of gender roles, identity, and power relations. These fields challenge traditional notions of gender and sexuality, advocating for the rights and recognition of all individuals, regardless of their gender identity or sexual orientation. We've got 2 more to go through. There's many more, but we'll finish with race and ethnic studies and 1 more. Critical race theory applies critical theory to race, examining how racism is embedded in social structures, institutions, and cultural norms. It challenges the idea of colorblindness and seeks to address systemic inequalities that promote racial justice and equity. The last one I'm going to go over is corporate and social and organizational studies. Critical theory is used to critique organizational practices and corporate cultures that perpetuate inequalities. It informs diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI efforts, which are non-existent in Alabama by now, challenging organizations to go beyond superficial changes and address deep-seated biased and structural barriers. I want to talk about the evolution of theory within this theory. So you know that we have intersectional feminism, correct? Okay, so there is a concept that is coming into a theoretical form, and it's called intersectional digital feminism. And the reason that that concept needs to be brought into theory is that intersectional feminism, it doesn't have enough meat to address what is happening in the digital space. And this is something that I'm very interested in. Okay, lastly, by applying critical theory across these and other areas, scholars, activists, and practitioners work towards understanding and dismantling the power structures that perpetuate inequality and injustice, aiming to create a more equitable and inclusive society. It sounds really good. But right now, in these United States, no one wants us to do that. And I won't be able to say this by October 2024.